Ella had returned to her hometown with her child, ready to attend her younger sister's wedding. On the way, all she could see were empty streets and lonely old folks. In this remote and aging town, most of the younger generation had long since left to work elsewhere, leaving behind the elderly, waiting year after year for their children to return home. When Ella finally arrived at her family's old house, she spotted her sister, the bride-to-be, waving excitedly from the front gate. Everything around the house still felt so familiar, a wave of comfort washing over her the moment she stepped through the door. But after walking through every room, she realized something was missing: her father. Her sister explained that their father had been living in a care home these past few years, and that she was planning to bring him home for the wedding the next day. Without hesitation, Ella volunteered to pick him up herself, offering to drive her sister and son to the care home that very afternoon. On the way there, they happened to run into Ella's ex-husband, Jack. Watching her son interact so warmly with his dad stirred a deep melancholy inside Ella. Maybe the divorce hadn't been the right call after all. But there wasn't much time to dwell on it. They soon pulled up in front of the care home. From the moment they walked inside, something felt wrong. The front lobby was littered with trash, like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. There was no staff in sight. Anxious to see her father, Ella made her way straight to the activity room. But what she found there made her stomach twist. The elderly residents weren't playing games or chatting with one another. They just stood there, completely still. Just then, a caregiver appeared at the care home. To Ella's surprise, it was Jack's current wife, who began complaining nonstop about the overwhelming increase in the number of elderly residents. She mentioned how the shortage of staff had forced them to sometimes tie up residents in their beds to avoid any unnecessary trouble. Ella's son, Noah, nervously walked through the hallway. The elderly resident's unblinking, intense gazes made him uncomfortable, and he felt sweat starting to form on his palms. Thankfully, not long after, he found his grandfather sitting in a wheelchair. But his grandfather's expression was completely blank. Despite calling his name several times, he didn't respond. Ella looked at her father, who was almost unrecognizable from the man she remembered 2 years ago. Tears welled up in her eyes as regret consumed her. She couldn't help but feel she shouldn't have left her hometown. The wedding went smoothly, with guests coming together in full celebration. The atmosphere was full of energy and joy, especially Noah, who, seeing his parents holding hands again and singing a family song, felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. However, not far away, the elderly people, watching the festivities, appeared painfully disconnected. On one side, there was laughter, music, and vitality. On the other, loneliness, solitude, and the inevitability of aging. The stark contrast seemed to pierce the hearts of the elderly, reminding them of what they had lost. To make matters worse, a male caregiver, noticing they weren't heading to bed, started mocking them.
Jetzt wollt ihr euch auch ein bisschen fein machen vorm Spiegel, hm?
The elderly residents' gazes began to sharpen, as if something was starting to stir within them. Meanwhile, an elderly resident in the power distribution room, who had been sick, suddenly began chewing on a power cable for no apparent reason. In an instant, the lights in the entire nursing home went out. The male caregiver, now increasingly anxious, rushed toward the elderly woman to stop her. But as if triggered by something, the old woman bit down hard on his arm. At that moment, more elderly residents in the room stood up, their movements sudden and aggressive, and they began savagely attacking the caregiver like crazed zombies. They didn't stop there. The other caregivers were also attacked. One tried to call the police, but before they could even finish dialing, soon, the building was filled with the horrifying sounds of struggle and death, and the floor was covered in severed limbs and bodies. But the carnage didn't stop there. Meanwhile, at Ella's sister's wedding, the event was nearing its end, and guests were starting to leave, braving the rain to head home. Jack and his current wife had just returned to their place when they noticed a figure standing nearby, shining a flashlight on them. They were shocked to see that it was one of the elderly residents from the nursing home. Jack immediately felt uneasy. He looked toward the small town and saw fire and chaos spreading, the entire area in disarray. Concerned for the safety of his ex-wife and children, Jack decided to drive into town to check on them. However, on the way, he was horrified to find that the wedding guests were all slaughtered by the side of the road. A group of terrifying elderly people, armed with axes, was still attacking anyone they came across. Realizing they were next, Jack quickly jumped into the car and fled with his wife. Meanwhile, the newlyweds, after their guests had left, were preparing to celebrate their wedding night. Unbeknownst to them, an elderly man had snuck into their house. He twisted off a large iron ball, then proceeded to remove his socks, which hadn't been changed in months, and fashioned a simple, deadly weapon. The bride, busy with her preparations, suddenly noticed the elderly man standing in the room. Before she could say a word, the groom was knocked to the ground by a blow from the iron ball. The bride, horrified, turned to run, but was struck by another flying ball, sending her tumbling down the stairs. All she could do was watch in terror as the elderly man slowly approached her, forcing something into her mouth. What was meant to be a joyous wedding celebration ended in a horrific tragedy. Downstairs, Ella, her older sister, heard some noise and ran to check. To her shock, she found their father, who was suffering from dementia, randomly playing the piano in the living room. But his eyes, those eyes were utterly unfamiliar to her. Just as she was trying to make sense of the situation, there came a knock at the door. Despite her fear, Ella opened it. Standing outside was an elderly woman, resembling a ghost, who vanished in an instant. This unsettling encounter made Ella feel even more uneasy. After urgently telling her daughter to lock the doors and windows, Ella quickly ran to her younger sister's house. But when Ella stepped into the room, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The newlywed suite, which should have been lit up in celebration, was pitch black. Her heart leaped to her throat. She pulled back the curtains and was instantly frozen in terror. Her sister and brother-in-law had already been gruesomely murdered in their bed, and on the other side of the room, there sat an elderly woman in a wedding dress. Just as Ella was about to flee, a crazed old man blocked her path. With no way out, she was forced to jump out of the window, landing right in front of Jack and his wife, who were rushing toward the town. By now, everyone realized the danger they were in and rushed back to their homes, locking the doors tightly. Not far from the houses, a large group of expressionless old people, moving like zombies, slowly closed in. But before they could attack, Ella, on the verge of collapse, realized her worst fear. Her son, Noah, was missing. Along with him, her father had also disappeared. Ella immediately guessed that they had been taken by the elderly group, and without hesitation, she grabbed her handgun, ignoring Jack's attempts to stop her, and dashed outside. At that moment, the house was surrounded by a crowd of fierce old people. Ella didn't care about the danger. She pushed forward through the crowd and saw her father standing in the front. In a fit of anger, she tackled him to the ground, demanding to know why he had taken her child. Inside the house, Jack was increasingly worried about his ex-wife's safety. Ignoring the desperate pleas of his current wife, he rushed out the door after her. With a quick move, he reached Ella just in time and pulled her into a tight embrace as she stood there on the verge of a complete breakdown. But before he could say anything, a piercing scream from their daughter echoed from the house. Realizing that something was terribly wrong, they both rushed back inside, only to find that their daughter was missing. Jack's current wife quickly informed them that an elderly person had entered the house. Panicking, Ella and Jack split up to search, and soon enough, behind the sofa, an old man crawled out slowly. Without a second thought for her own safety, Ella fired a shot, killing the man instantly. They continued their search, finally finding their daughter in the kitchen, visibly shaken from the attack. However, the old man was still not out of the fight. With a sudden toss, he knocked Ella to the ground, and Jack was quickly overwhelmed as well. Just as things seemed hopeless, Ella regained consciousness and sprang into action. She landed a few solid blows that knocked the old man unconscious. After quickly tying him up with duct tape, Ella grabbed a fork and ruthlessly pressed it down, demanding to know where her son Noah was. But the mutated old man wouldn't answer. He seemed completely indifferent to his fate, his eyes empty as though he had already resigned to death. Furious, Ella pulled out her handgun, ready to make him talk. Just then, Noah appeared in the stairwell, revealing that his grandfather had told him to hide in the attic and not come out. The family was finally back together, but their nightmare was far from over. Outside, a massive horde of mutated elderly stood silently, eyes locked on the house, ready to strike at any moment. Leading them was the old woman in the wedding dress, her expression disturbingly calm, as if planning something far worse. That deadly combination of fearlessness and cold calculation made her the most dangerous of them all. Ella's family huddled together in the living room, watching every twitch and shift outside, praying that the nightmare would soon pass. But not everyone inside was focused on survival. Jack's current wife was preoccupied with bitterness. Ever since Jack had risked his life to protect his ex-wife, she'd felt a knot of resentment growing. And on more than one night, she had heard him muttering Ella's name in his sleep. Whether it was jealousy or sheer spite, what she did next shocked even herself. She knocked Ella unconscious and dragged her outside. When Ella finally came to, she found herself surrounded by the creeping, grotesque elders. Terrified, she began banging frantically on the front door, screaming for help. Inside, Jack heard her cries and rushed to open the door, but the second he unlocked it, Dozens of decaying arms shoved their way in. Blades flashed. One stabbed him again and again. In the chaos, Ella's daughter acted quickly, grabbing a fire extinguisher and spraying through the opening to buy them time. Meanwhile, Jack's current wife stood frozen, overwhelmed by guilt and shock. She had never imagined her actions would lead to this, her husband injured and the children in danger. Unable to live with what she'd done, she silently climbed the stairs, opened the second-floor window, and, without hesitation, stepped into the cold night air. The group was in shock, but the death of Jack's current wife gave them a brief moment to catch their breath. Taking advantage of this, Ella quickly slipped into a room, and Jack, abandoning the now-broken front door, retreated into the living room, slamming the door shut as the last line of defense. But outside, a group of maddened elders were closing in, and the flimsy wooden door wouldn't hold for long. To make matters worse, Jack had been seriously wounded when he tried to stop the assault earlier. A deep cut to his artery meant he wouldn't last much longer. Ella's daughter peered through the crack of the door and saw something terrifying. The elders were pouring gasoline around the house. Within seconds, flames engulfed the living room, and thick smoke began to fill the air. Jack, now completely unconscious, knowing she had no choice, Ella left him and rushed to the basement with her children. As she was about to close the basement door behind them, she saw the mutated elder break through the living room door and charge toward them. Frantically, Ella urged her children to hurry, but it was too late. One of the elders grabbed Ella's legs, dragging her backward with terrifying strength. Screams filled the air as she was pulled into the suffocating darkness. Devastated, Ella's daughter could only continue running with her younger brother. After finally escaping the basement, she received a call from her boyfriend. He told her that the entire town had fallen, and they agreed to meet at the beach to escape by speedboat. But as they stepped out of the cabin, they were met with an unexpected sight. Her grandfather was blocking the door, and standing beside him was the most dangerous elder of them all. There was no chance for the little girl to escape. As she closed her eyes, ready to face her doom, she instinctively began to sing the family song. This was an old tune passed down through generations, with lyrics that spoke of the beauty of family and the love between relatives. To her surprise, after hearing the song, her grandfather's eyes seemed to regain some spark. He picked up the handgun lying on the ground and, to everyone's shock, aimed it at the powerful elder and pulled the trigger. Afterward, her grandfather, holding the two children, began to cry, saying he would never harm his family. In the end, Ella's children and elderly father managed to meet up with her boyfriend at the beach. Together, the four of them boarded the speedboat and sailed away, finally escaping the nightmare that had consumed their town.